The thing I like about Vancouver is that weed is legal here next summer. The Sheridan Wall Center, Vancouver. That's where we are. Look, show how nice it looks here. So we're here with Peter. This is Peter Allard for the Peter Allard Prize, and we're heading over right now for the ceremony. And I'm excited about it.
Questions and answers, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's what we're doing. We're going to Glenn Greenwald's giving a question and answer right now, right?
Right.
The ceremony's later.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm dumb, so I get a lot of things wrong. So we're in the car. We're on our way to the Glenn Greenwald question and answer. I'm going to ask Glenn Greenwald what his favorite restaurant is. So here we are at the University of, is this British Columbia? Yes, it is. We're going to meet Glenn Greenwald. He's going to have a question and answer. I don't know what I'm going to ask him, but look how pretty this campus is. This is the most picturesque campus, I think. Pepperdine's also pretty nice, but this is fantastic, huh? Those are real mountains. It's not a painting. Those are real mountains. That's the ocean. It's real. Everything here is real. That's the beauty of Canada, eh? Can you talk about how the left media sandbagged Bernie Sanders and about the kind of mind-blowing red baiting that's happening in the lefty media?
Are you Jimmy Dore? That was so disturbing. It just popped out of my YouTube box. And you exist in real life? I didn't know that that was possible. So you want to know how the lefty media sandbagged Bernie Sanders? Is that what you're asking?
Please talk about the phenomena of that. Lord Saul told me when Bernie started running that he didn't have to worry about the right-wing media, that he's going to have to worry about the left-wing media. I thought he was crazy because I'm dumb, but he was right about that. And then this, again, every day, MSNBC, red baits, it is mind-blowing, and no one's trying to stop them.
So I guess what I'll say about that is, because it's a little off topic, and I'm happy to talk to you about it more for your show or just for your own personal edification if you want to chat afterwards. But I guess what I would say is when I first started writing about politics, it was 2005, and it was the Bush years. And one of the reasons I was able to develop a platform more or less quickly is because all these Democrats and all of these liberals loved the work I was doing, and they supported the work I was doing, and they helped me build my platform because at the time I was criticizing George Bush and his assault on civil liberties and his use of militarism. And I had all these supporters and who were largely Democrats and liberals because I was attacking Bush. Starting around, I don't know, I guess maybe January 20th, 2009, which is the day that George Bush left office and Obama entered office, I lost all those friends. They stopped caring about civil liberties. They stopped caring about war. The anti-war movement disappeared, even as Obama escalated bombing in lots of places and intensified civil liberties assault. And I think that what got exposed is that there really is no left-wing media in the United States. It really, what people thought was the left-wing media was actually a Democratic Party media, which is something much different. So I think that one of the interesting things about the unraveling of centrist institutions in Europe, where the Socialist Party in France has disappeared and the Blairites in the UK are completely discredited and the establishment wing of the Democratic Party is suffering so much, there's kind of an unraveling of politics, and it creates a great opportunity that can be scary on the one hand because the right, new right can take over, but the left can actually have a really interesting opportunity as well. And you see that with Jeremy Corbyn. I think you see that with a lot of energy on the left. And so rather than sit around with grievances about the past, I'm sort of more interested in kind of how these divisions can be exploited to build something better.
So are you worried that something will get repercussions to you?
Well, if you will be all scared, so we will not be here, honestly. So
you're not?
We are not scared. So we feel like this is part of our professional duty. I mean, we're journalists. I'm a journalist first of all, and I was Khadijah's editor for a long time. And we are good friends, and she went to jail. I didn't, so why should I be afraid? So we believe that this is just part of our life.
Is there like a unity in the journalists and opposition?
Well, yes. In Azerbaijan, there's a government-controlled media and an independent media, which government is trying to destroy.
Okay.
So we are part of that independent circle. and we're trying to expand that city. But of course, we see the government assistance.
Okay.
So hopefully, things will change. And again, this award helps us to get strong. You know.
Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.
She was also arrested, correct?
She was called for questioning, but not via the usual way. Like they could have sent her a paper asking her to present herself for questioning, but they stormed into the house. The police came to take her for the questioning, and it was very intimidating and very unusual.
And so is she fearful of what's going to happen to her, or how does she fight through that fear?
Okay. When the problem started, Azza was outside of Egypt. And everybody, friends and family, kept on screaming, "Don't come back, Azza, don't come back." And she insisted on coming back, and she said, "If I am going to fight back, I am going to do it from inside Egypt." That was before the travel ban, but she was ready for anything. We were expecting her being put behind bars. And it didn't make her think twice before coming immediately back to Egypt once she got to know about that there is charges moving. She said, "I would not let other people pay for that." And she came back. Okay, so I would say that she was not moved by the fear or not fear by the threat or the non-threat, but on a personal level, after storming into her house, I know now that my friend thinks twice about how she is dressed in case they storm again. I know that my friend now thinks about how much money she has in her purse before going to a restaurant or not, because she cannot use credit cards anymore. There are things on a day-to-day basis that do not really seem big, but it wasn't part of her world before. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for talking with us.
Thank you.
What are the consequences on you fighting corruption?
All right, that's a good question. We really feel like we are, first thing is doing our duty as public officials. This is what we have to do. However, we feel personally very honored to be, I myself can say I am very honored to be a part of this team. It is a fulfillment of a life of work being realized now with this investigation. It's something that we've always wanted to do, and now for the first time we are able to do.
And so has there been talk about some of the blowback that you've gotten for exposing corruption? What are some of the prices you've had to pay?
All right. So this is an investigation that deals with the most powerful businessmen, politicians in Brazil. And of course, we get a lot of pressure from outside and attacks against the investigation. And when the facts are so clear that you cannot defend yourself against the facts, you try to go on the outside and attack the investigation and the investigators, the public officials on the case. So we get a lot of even fake news producing media that will say bad thing about us and the investigation itself. We have a lot of messages that are passed on to the media. They are repeated over and over. And when you look at the numbers, when you look at the facts, you see that nothing like that has happened in our investigation. So we have to, one of the things that we have been doing to protect ourselves against this is to be extremely transparent from the beginning. So all of our case is on the internet. Whatever is not under court seal is on the internet. We incentivize people to go online and to check the facts for themselves so that we are also protected against this.
No, last question. Have you noticed that? Have you inspired anybody else to fight corruption in Brazil or outside?
Well, we do see this, and we are very glad for this. We started a movement in Brazil in order to change the laws, the criminal laws that would give privileges to white-collar criminals and politicians. And we put up a package of 10 legislative proposals to change this, to change the scenario of impunity in Brazil, and also other measures to prevent corruption and to help obtain back the money that has been stolen. This is a work that started with us, but however, over 2 million people in Brazil got involved in this campaign, and they signed the petition to Congress in order to pass these laws. Finally, at the end, they were not passed, but however, I believe that we have put out a campaign that is gonna keep up, and we hope that this has consequences even for next year, and even for the politicians to come to understand what society really wants. And apart from that, outside of Brazil as well, our case is extremely connected to the world. We now have over international legal assistance demands with over 30 countries, in fact 39 countries. And now we have already over 100 demands from other countries to Brazil in order to ask us to assist them in their investigation. So we see a lot of prosecutors, we see people from civil society that come into us from other countries and asking, how did you do this? Can you help us on our job as well? So this has been extremely a pleasure for us.
Hey, thanks for talking with us.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Barrett, and I'm the Executive Director of Allard Prize Initiatives, and also the Director of Allard Law's International Justice and Human Rights Clinic. It's an honor and a privilege to play a leadership role in carrying out the inspiring vision of the Allard Prize. After a comprehensive nomination and selection process, this year's 3 honorees were selected from 244 nominations coming from 70 different countries. The honorees were selected on carefully considered prize criteria, which include demonstrated courage and leadership in the fight against corruption or the protection of human rights in a manner that promotes transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. I would like to introduce the person who made this evening possible, Mr. Peter A. Allard, QC. Lawyer and businessman, Peter graduated from the UBC with a BA in History in 1968 and an LLB in 1971. After graduation, Peter practiced law for more than 20 years and engaged in various business enterprises. With a keen legal mind and a passionate commitment to creating positive change, he also assumed leadership roles in human rights, environmental advocacy, and other philanthropic work. Peter, thank you for your passion in fighting corruption and promoting human rights, for your visionary leadership in the pursuit of justice, and for your support of this very significant initiative. Please join me in recognizing Peter as he comes to the podium. Thank you very much.
Honored and distinguished guests, finalists, and guests. First of all, a huge, heartfelt thanks to all members of the prize committee, especially Nicole Barrett, and to Carrie Strelowski, Max Fisher, and Lisa Dam for their tireless work. Across borders, our videographers who face extremely tight schedules, sometimes under dangerous conditions, to bring us such wonderful, inspiring stories. Tiago Rourke of Portugal for the beautifully crafted, unique sculptures. Sheraton Vancouver Wall Centre. Donald Best, one of Canada's most methodical and well-documented whistleblowers, for the much-needed assistance to the Allard Prize. And to all of our finalists and their representatives, Glenn Greenwald for his well-reasoned and articulated journalistic conversations, Jimmy Dore, Steph Zamorano, and Jordan Chariton's associates for standing up for the 99% who bring truth to power.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the experience that I had that has really shaped how I view this kind of work and the heroic nature of it and the reason why it deserves protection and admiration. And that was the work that I did with my source, the whistleblower Edward Snowden. The work that I did with Edward Snowden really was transformative for me in so many ways, and it really illuminated so many critical issues that have shaped how I think about things that I'm sure will last for the rest of my life. And one of the reasons that that's true is for a long time before I began doing that work, I was writing a lot about the need to be adversarial to those in power, to stand up to the country's most powerful factions whenever they're engaged in corruption and wrongdoing. And what I ultimately discovered is that it's actually somewhat easy to say that, but much more difficult to actually do it when the time comes that you're confronted with it. And you don't actually fully understand what it entails until you actually go and do it and live all the risks and live all the threats and live all the difficulties and burdens and choices that you have to make. So I just want to share with you a couple of anecdotes that I think really illuminate why the work of the three finalists is so important and what binds together people who, at great risk to themselves, do this sort of thing. So when I first started talking to Edward Snowden, it was late 2012, and he contacted me via the internet. And we ended up speaking for many weeks, during which I had no information at all, no knowledge whatsoever about who he was. He was telling me, and then he had demonstrated to me that he had taken extremely sensitive documents from the most secretive agency within the world's most powerful government, which he said he wanted to share with me. And he then demonstrated that he had those. But I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he worked. I didn't know anything about him personally. I didn't know his age. I knew nothing. And in the very first conversation, the very first one that I ever had with him, he said, look, I want to give you these materials because I know that the world needs to see them. And I think you're the person who can deliver them in a way that will be effective. And I started to talk to him about ways that I could shield his anonymity, to protect the government, to protect him from having the government discover who he was. And he said, no, you don't understand. I don't want anonymity. I want to come out in public and I want to declare who I am and explain what it is that I've done and explain why I did it, because I've done nothing wrong. And I said to him, well, that is a choice that you're free to make, but you should know that if you do that, it's almost certain that you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. And he said, that's a risk I'm willing to take. And at the time, in my mind, I was developing a picture of him. I'm sure you've all had the experience of talking to somebody over the internet that you've never met, and you develop a picture of what they look like, and it's never anything like what they actually look like. So in my mind, while I was talking to Edward Snowden for all these weeks, I had assumed that he was an older person, probably in his 60s or 70s, in part because he was very sophisticated about what he was saying, in part because I thought somebody who'd become that jaded that they were willing to go to prison to stop what they viewed as this level of corruption had probably been around for decades, and also because I thought that somebody who was so willing to say, I'm willing to go to prison for the rest of my life, probably meant I'll go to prison for 5 years or 10 years, which is how much longer I have to live, not for 50 or 60 years. And so in June of 2013, I traveled to Hong Kong, and I met him for the first time. And he wasn't 60 or 70. He was 29 at the time, and he actually looked much younger. He looked 22 or 23. He sort of looked like a kid who worked in a video game store at a mall, just sort of this nerd in a t-shirt who kind of wandered out. And it was one of the most disorienting events of my life, in part because it was hard to believe that somebody that young had access to such sensitive information, but more so because it really made me confounded about why somebody that young would be willing to go sit in a prison for the next 60 years in defense of some sort of abstract political value that didn't really affect his life very much in a direct way. And so I actually spent 2 or 3 days in Hong Kong grilling him, interrogating him about what his actual motives were. I needed to understand why he was willing to do this. And it took a while for me to get answers that were satisfactory because he really hadn't even thought so much about it, and he was kind of reluctant to talk about himself. He wanted to talk about the documents instead. But what I finally came to understand, what he finally said to me that made me feel the authenticity and the conviction of what he was saying, he said to me, I cannot live the rest of my life knowing that I had the opportunity to do something about this grave injustice, and I chose instead, out of fear, to do nothing. And then he told me that there's, no matter what it is that the US government might do to him, put him in prison, kill him, persecute him, vilify him in public, none of that, he said, could compete with the pain and the suffering that he would endure of having to live the rest of his life knowing that he capitulated to fear
as opposed to standing up and defending the things that he believed in. And I found all of that just so remarkable, and it really was so transformative for me to this very day. And I think there's some really critical lessons that we can all draw about people who do that sort of heroic work that certainly applies to all three finalists tonight. To begin with, I think that one really valuable lesson that comes from that is that any person in the society, no matter how seemingly ordinary or average or powerless, can really change the world. Whatever you think of Edward Snowden, he changed the world. He altered diplomatic relations between countries. He radically changed the way we think about critical concepts like privacy and surveillance and government secrecy and the role of the United States and the role of journalism and democracy. And what was so amazing to me about Edward Snowden was how ordinary he was. He grew up in a lower middle class household. His father was in the Coast Guard. He dropped out of high school. He had no power, no position, no prestige. And yet, through nothing more than an act of conscience, an act of courage, he changed the world. And I think it is incredibly important to always realize that no matter how formidable institutions might seem, no matter how powerful corrupt factions might appear to be, you always have, every person has within themselves the ability to fight it and to change it. Can really change the world.